Most women think they know how to control men, until they meet the one man none of their tactics work on. Here's why he changes everything. Modern dating has created an environment where many women rarely encounter a man whose sense of self isn't up for negotiation. They're used to meeting men who immediately adjust, softening their voice, shifting their posture, reshaping opinions, even rewriting their desires the moment they sense her approval wavering. It's become almost second nature for a lot of men, like a reflex developed from years of being told that the highest virtue is keeping a woman comfortable at all costs. So when a woman finally meets a man who doesn't operate in that framework, she feels something she can't quite name without sounding exaggerated. She pulls out the same patterns that once kept less grounded men orbiting her. Flirting mixed with distance, warmth followed by coolness, a drip of attention and then nothing. But instead of reacting the way she expects, he notices the pattern without stepping into it. He sees the behavior instead of the performance. And because he isn't bending himself to match her cues, the interaction rattles her in a quiet, unfamiliar way. Nature has always understood a truth that dating coaches often miss. Power shifts the moment someone realizes the other person cannot be emotionally stirred on command. When a woman senses she cannot shape a man's mood, something in her recalibrates. Not in a submissive way, but in a surprised, slightly disoriented way, as if someone just switched the rules of a game she thought she knew. She's spent most of her adult life in a world where male attention comes effortlessly. She's grown comfortable with the idea that influence is just part of existing. But this man stands differently. He's not in a rush. He doesn't treat her reactions as instructions. His sense of direction comes from within, not from the social dance unfolding in front of him. And once she realizes this, she becomes more observant, not because he's playing mind games, but because he represents a niche of masculinity she rarely sees. A man whose value isn't tied to performance, but to the architecture of his mindset. Nietzsche might say he resembles someone who writes the rules rather than follows them. Modern women respond to that instinctively. The man who doesn't flinch becomes the man she watches most closely. She might test him, but not out of manipulation, more out of habit. A delayed reply, a teasing comment, a subtle provocation that would normally make a man lean in harder, adjust, or overcompensate. Yet when she sees, he acknowledges what she's doing without bending around it. Something shifts internally. She's not used to her emotional tactics registering, but failing to create movement. The result is an interesting combination of curiosity and mild frustration. It isn't hostility. It's simply the realization that she's in a dynamic that doesn't operate in the emotional economy she's familiar with. And this is where the psychological shift begins. She starts paying deeper attention to him. Not because she's trying to outmaneuver him, but because she's trying to understand a pattern she's never studied before. She notices his calm in moments where most men would get defensive or needy. She sees how he never raises his emotional energy to match someone else's intensity. He stays steady, engaged but not entangled, present but not clingy, connected but not dependent. His consistency feels almost foreign in a dating world saturated with emotional whiplash. Nature has always leaned toward the same conclusion. The strongest individuals are those who hold their center, while others wobble. And that stability becomes the quiet source of his influence. He's not trying to lead her or control the situation. He simply refuses to be controlled by it. Ironically, that's exactly what draws her in. A woman who's used to shaping men suddenly finds herself studying one instead, not because he withholds affection, but because he exists in a different emotional climate. She might not explain it aloud, but she feels it. He doesn't collapse inward or expand outward based on her reactions. He exists on stable ground. In modern dating, that alone changes everything. What unsettles her isn't just his confidence. Plenty of men try to project confidence. It's the absence of need that sets him apart. He's not speaking to impress or flirting to secure validation. There's no underlying hunger in his tone, no reaching, no subtle pressure for approval. He listens without performing. He talks without persuading. He moves through the world without broadcasting his intentions. That lack of need creates an emotional space around him, and she feels it instantly, even if she can't articulate why. Most men give themselves away quickly. She can almost pinpoint the exact moment a man starts wanting something from her. Attention, attraction, approval, anything. And even if she doesn't misuse that awareness, it still creates leverage. Not manipulative leverage, but leverage nonetheless. With this man, that moment never comes. She doesn't sense a shift where he begins recalibrating himself to pull her closer. And because that moment doesn't exist, her normal instincts don't activate. She isn't preparing to protect herself. She isn't adjusting her tone or crafting a persona. She's simply present, observing, trying to understand someone who doesn't move according to familiar rhythms. This is the essence of a man guided by his own internal compass. Someone who exists beyond the social choreography that dominates modern relationships. He responds to her the same way he responds to everything else in life, with clarity, not performance. And slowly, the dynamic tilts. She becomes more intentional around him. Not because he demands it, but because she doesn't want to disrupt the rare sense of authenticity he brings into the interaction. He never raises his voice or asserts authority. He doesn't need to. A man who is genuinely centered carries more influence through silence and steadiness than others do through force. If she pulls away, he doesn't chase. If she gets emotional, he doesn't mirror it. If she becomes unpredictable, he doesn't contort himself to stabilize the moment. This neutrality isn't coldness, it's sovereignty. And in a world where emotions often swing uncontrollably, sovereignty feels like gravity. Quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. She starts noticing things she normally overlooks. How he doesn't rush to fill silence. How he doesn't scramble to fix emotional moments that aren't his responsibility. How he speaks from conviction instead of anticipation. She notices that attraction doesn't make him softer or more frantic. It makes him more focused, more aligned, more grounded. Most women are used to men melting the moment they feel chemistry. But he doesn't melt. He becomes clearer. And in that clarity, she finds herself adjusting in ways she never expected. Her playful chaos becomes calm. Her teasing becomes sincerity. Her performative strategies lose their appeal. Not because he scolds her or judges her, but because in the presence of someone who's genuinely anchored, anything artificial feels strangely small. His authenticity becomes a mirror. It shows her where she stands. It reveals whether she's operating from truth or from habit. And without meaning to, he becomes the center of gravity, not by pulling, but by remaining still while everything else rotates. When a man's identity is built on internal truth rather than external approval, his presence reshapes the dynamic without effort. He doesn't command the room. He doesn't try to dominate a conversation. He doesn't parade his value. Instead, he simply stands in who he is, and that alone forces the energy around him to reorganize. Women often encounter men who mistake performance for strength. Men who inflate themselves to appear confident or shrink themselves to appear harmless. Men who contort their personalities, hoping to win affection or avoid conflict. But this man doesn't change shape. He doesn't stretch himself to fit expectations or fold himself to avoid discomfort. He stays aligned with his own standards, steady, consistent, congruent. And that congruence is what draws her in. If something feels off, he says it plainly. If something doesn't align with his standards, he doesn't argue or defend his boundaries. He simply holds them. Not with aggression, but with quiet certainty. His standards aren't demands. They're reflections of the structure he lives by. For a woman who's navigated a dating landscape filled with emotional contradictions, this simplicity feels almost shocking. She discovers there is nothing to decipher. nothing to decode, nothing to negotiate. His clarity creates an environment where honesty becomes the path of least resistance. Without realizing it, she begins to match his tone. The impulsive games she used with less grounded men feel unnecessary. The emotional drama she used as a test or shield feels out of place. Her conversations with him become more direct, more thoughtful, more genuine. She stops worrying about maintaining an image and starts listening to herself more carefully. Not because he demands sincerity, but because the space he creates naturally encourages it. His steadiness functions like a mirror. It doesn't judge. It doesn't distort. It simply reflects. And in that reflection, she sees where she's aligned and where she's not. This is the psychological shift almost no one talks about in modern dating. The real transformation doesn't happen when a man tries to control a woman. It happens when he no longer needs to. A man who has mastered himself holds a kind of internal weight that other people naturally adjust around. Not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of instinct. Nature has always respected equilibrium. And a person who remains centered in a chaotic environment commands attention without trying. Women often say they want a man who leads, but leadership is rarely what they encounter. What most encounter is overcompensation, men acting dominant because they don't feel grounded internally. This man doesn't lead in that performative sense. He simply moves with direction, and she feels pulled into that direction because it's more stable than the uncertainty she's used to. His life has momentum independent of her involvement. His goals don't wobble to accommodate her moods. His priorities don't evaporate when he feels attraction. His path existed before she arrived and will continue whether she stays or goes. That's what changes everything. She starts becoming more honest with herself. She can't use the same strategies that worked on men who were easily shifted. They feel transparent now, like trying to use childhood tricks in an adult conversation. She finds herself speaking plainly, telling the truth instead of hinting, expressing instead of performing. His presence doesn't intimidate her, it organizes her. And this is where the deeper dynamic emerges. Modern dating culture rarely acknowledges this, but it's fundamental. A woman cannot fully respect or connect with a man she can easily control. If she can move him with a mood swing, if she can shake his center with silence, if she can bend his choices with a pout, the relationship loses polarity. What begins as excitement collapses into emotional fatigue. But when she encounters a man whose center cannot be moved by momentary emotion, something awakens in her. She no longer sees him as someone to manage. She sees him as someone to align with. Not in a hierarchical sense, but in a sense of resonance. He manages himself, which gives her permission to stop managing everything. He remains calm when she is overwhelmed, which allows her to breathe instead of spiral. He doesn't crumble when life applies pressure, which helps her feel safe instead of reactive. This isn't dominance. It's stability. This isn't patriarchy. It's psychology. This isn't control. It's coherence. And coherence, especially in the modern dating landscape, is rare. Dating today is filled with noise, overthinking, insecurity, performance, unspoken expectations, emotional volatility. But a man who stays grounded through all that becomes the rarest presence in the room. He becomes the person whose energy sets the tone instead of absorbing everyone else's. His strength isn't loud. It isn't performative. It isn't a show of force. His strength is what he refuses to surrender inside himself. When a modern woman encounters that kind of strength, her instinct isn't rebellion. It's recalibration. She orients herself around that steadiness because it creates something she rarely experiences: direction. Not direction imposed on her, but direction that exists whether she participates or not. It offers her a framework in a world full of shifting signals. That alignment, subtle, unspoken, mutual, is the real influence. The quiet kind. The kind that requires no announcement. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that forms organically, without ever being negotiated. Over time, she becomes more aware of how different he is from the men she has known. While most men try to win her by proving worth or displaying devotion, he doesn't even play in that arena. He isn't competing for validation. He isn't auditioning for approval. His life isn't built around romantic pursuit, it's built around purpose. He has faced his own insecurities and ambitions, and carved out a sense of self that cannot be outsourced or inflated by someone else's attention. That creates a quiet gravity in him, a groundedness she feels every time they talk, sit in silence, or simply exist in the same space. Nature has always suggested that real power is the ability to remain oneself in the presence of others. And that's exactly what she encounters. He doesn't exaggerate to impress. He doesn't shrink to comfort. He stands exactly as he is, unapologetic, unadjusted, real. And instead of pushing her away, that authenticity draws her closer. She begins to understand something she may never have articulated before. Modern women don't crave dominance from men. They crave consistency. They crave a man whose inner world isn't disrupted by the chaos of the external one. A man who thinks clearly when emotions rise. A man who stays grounded when plans fall apart. A man who moves with intention instead of impulse. This isn't a call for superiority. It's a call for emotional adulthood. And in a dating scene saturated with instability, adulthood feels like attraction. So how do grounded, self-directed men create influence in dating? By not chasing it. By not bending for approval. By not performing for acceptance. By standing firmly on the terms that define who they are, with or without a woman in their life. Control isn't something they seek. It's something that emerges naturally from the structure of their character. They don't bend when affection appears. They don't panic when attention fades. They don't crumble under pressure. And because they cannot be moved, everything around them adjusts. Not through dominance. Not through force. But through the undeniable pull of someone who has mastered himself. And that, more than bravado or performance, is what makes a woman respond, not out of submission, but out of instinct, out of respect, out of alignment. A man who cannot be shaken becomes the rarest force in the modern dating world. And her world shifts not because he demands it, but because her instincts recognize the gravity of someone who stands unmovable. If this perspective helped you understand the real psychology behind grounded masculine energy, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into this niche.